Hi, I'm Jen from Tea Leaves in Tweed, and welcome to another morning tea session. This morning I'm sharing something of an old favorite. This is the Asian Beauty Dark Roast Oolong from beautiful Taiwan Tea Company. I actually got this tea for the first time a couple of years ago when I very first started buying from beautiful Taiwan Tea Company. I think it might have been the first tea I ever bought from them. And it really is one of my favorites. Earlier in the spring, I went on a bit of a buying spree and bought a lot of new oolongs and a couple of new pu'er teas and a lot of other teas. And since then, I found myself with less of a desire to drink tea. So this is the first time I'm really breaking into a lot of these teas I bought a few months ago. This is one that I've had before, but I thought I'd share my tasting notes with you, because it really is one of my favorites and I think a really nice introduction to roasted oolong teas. So let's brew. So here I have my brewing setup. I'm brewing in my kind of old standby green gawan, and then I'm just gonna pour it into this beautiful teacup that I got from a local ceramic artisan. I love this little basket, but it is a little cramped for brewing, so I'm gonna put it to the side and take my teaware out. So here I have about 5 grams of my Asian Beauty Oolong, which you can see is not a rolled leaf oolong. It's kind of fluffy and frizzly, and it's quite dark. So I'm going to put that in my gawan. I'm going to give it a little bit of a rinse. My water is at between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit. And we'll just warm up our cup for a bit. And this rinse water can be discarded. Now it's time for our first steeping. I'm going to give this a 1-minute steep to start with. I'm so glad that the weather here has cooled off a little bit. It still gets very hot in the middle of the day, but in the mornings, especially in the shade in my backyard, it's quite cool and pleasant. And thankfully the humidity hasn't started back up again. I know it'll get warm again as July and August go on, but I am thankful for the break in heat so that I can have some hot tea outside without feeling horrible. Although maybe in the coming weeks I'll have to show you some of my cold tea methods once it gets too hot to drink hot tea outside. I do drink hot tea even when it's hot outside, but I don't always drink it outside when it's this warm. So now it's been just about 1 minute. So I'm going to go ahead and strain my tea into my cup. Now this cup is quite dark, so it's a little hard to get a sense of the color of the infusion. So I'm going to pour a little bit into my display vessel, and you can see it's a bit of a light color for a heavy roasted oolong tea. So let's give it a taste. So I have my cup of Asian Beauty Oolong to try here. This is the first steeping after 1 minute. It has that beautiful classic floral and honey smell of roasted oolong that I love so much. This first infusion is very light, but you can still taste a little bit of honey, a little bit of floral, maybe even herbaceous scents to it. I've spoken in the past about how oolong teas sometimes have a bit of a cannabis note to it. And this is definitely one of those teas, although it's a very mild note in the flavor profile. It's just a really lovely everyday tea to drink in the morning. It's not too complicated and it's not too fussy. I feel like I can brew this tea however I want. I'm brewing it in Gaiwan today, but I've brewed it Western style in a big mug with an infuser and just let it steep for 3 or 4 minutes, and it's still just as lovely. So I'm going to finish this cup of tea, and then why don't we see what a second steeping tastes like? And we're back with our brewing setup. We can see the leaves have started to uncurl a little bit. Even though they're not rolled, they still kind of expand in the hot water. They actually have a bit more of a greenish tinge to them than they looked like they had dry. So I'm going to add a little bit more hot water. And I'm going to give the second steeping 45 seconds because the first steeping was a bit light for my tastes. And we'll see if that brings out a little bit more than a 30-second second steeping. So I've said before that oolongs are one of my excuse me. I've said before that oolongs are one of my favorite types of teas. And if you read my blog post earlier this week, you'll know that Don May from Mayleaf says that oolong teas probably have the lowest caffeine, particularly heavy roasted oolong teas. So I've been investigating a lot of oolong teas since I started worrying about my caffeine intake. And it's been about 45 seconds. We'll give this a strain. Take a look at it. That is actually a bit richer of a golden color than the first steeping, I think. Let's give this one a taste. So I'm going to smell my Gaiwan lid before I taste this one. It's a beautiful smelling tea. It has a very subtle fragrance to go along with the subtle flavor profile. This has a little bit more grassiness to it, but it's still that floral, honey, slight herbal smell to it that I really love. The roast doesn't come through as strongly as it does in some other oolongs. Perhaps this is a less roasted oolong than I thought it was. But it's still just a very smooth tea. It doesn't taste sweet like I added sugar to it, but it has that honey flavor to it that almost makes it have a sweet note to the flavor that I really love. I always find that kind of simple, classic roasted oolong teas remind me a little bit of a really good Chinese restaurant tea. I think it's because when I was growing up, my father knew one of the owners of one of the local Chinese restaurants, so we went there a lot. And when he served tea, it didn't taste like the tea we drank at home, which was usually Lipton or Twinings or red rose tea. It had a different flavor to it. And then when I got older and I started exploring other kinds of tea, I discovered that oolong tea tasted very close to what Mr. Kwok used to serve in his restaurant. And maybe that's part of the reason I love oolong teas so much, for the nostalgia. Well, this is just a very lovely cup of tea. One of my favorites, the Asian Beauty Oolong from the beautiful Taiwan Tea Company. I'm so glad you were able to join me again for a morning tea session, and I hope I see you again soon. Bye.